At a luxurious restaurant, I was having lunch with my wife and son. When my son stood up to pay the bill, a strange young woman walked straight to our table and placed a small wooden box in front of me. She leaned in so close that I could feel her breath and whispered, "Tonight, open it. You need to know something very important." Before I could ask anything, she disappeared. Suddenly, I felt an uneasy premonition. Welcome to the Dad Silent Revenge channel. I'm so grateful you're here, seriously, thank you. Now tell me something, what city or country are you watching from right now? Leave it in the comments, I read every single one. Fair warning, parts of this story are fictional, shaped for storytelling and the conversations worth having. Names and settings are coincidental, but the lesson underneath all of it, that part is yours to keep. 30 Years Undercover teaches you one thing above everything else: the most dangerous rooms are never the ones that look dangerous. The Thornfield Grill on a Tuesday afternoon looked about as dangerous as a postcard. White tablecloths, soft piano from somewhere near the bar, wait staff who moved like they'd been trained not to exist until you needed them. Evelyn had her hand around a glass of sparkling water, and Julian was cutting into a piece of salmon like a man who had never had a single problem in his life. I watched my son and told myself I was just having lunch. "Dad, seriously, the color looks good on you." Julian set down his fork and reached across to adjust the collar of my jacket the way he used to straighten his own tie before school presentations. "Retirement agrees with you." "Retirement means I wake up at 5 and have nothing to shoot at," I said. He laughed. It was a good laugh, warm, easy, exactly the kind of laugh that fills a room and makes everyone around it relax. Evelyn smiled. I smiled. The piano kept playing. "So the party," Julian said, leaning back and picking up his wine. "I was thinking the Langham, private ballroom, 3rd floor, 80 guests, maybe a little more. Nothing over the top, just the people who actually matter." "Julian, you don't have to..." "Dad," he pointed at me with his glass, half serious. "You spent 30 years keeping other people safe. You missed birthdays, anniversaries, Christmases, the time I broke my arm falling out of the oak tree in the backyard and you weren't home for 3 weeks after. The least I can do is throw you a decent party." Something pulled behind my sternum. Not quite guilt, something older. "The oak tree," Evelyn said softly, shaking her head. "I had to drive him to the ER with a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old in the back seat." "Noah cried the whole way," Julian said, still smiling. But something moved behind his eyes when he said the name quick, like a fish turning underwater gone before I could name it. "Noah was 4, I said. "He cried at everything." "Right." Julian took a long sip of wine. "Anyway, the Langham, 3rd Saturday of November. I've already spoken to their events coordinator." "You've already spoken to them," Evelyn repeated. "Mom, I know how this family works. If I ask first, Dad says no, you say maybe, and 3 months later, nothing happens." He spread his hands wide, grinning. "So I didn't ask. I planned." Evelyn looked at me across the table. Her expression was warm enough, but her fingers had tightened slightly around her glass, a tell so small that only someone who had shared a bed with her for 40 years would catch it. I filed it away without knowing why. "All right," I said. "The Langham." Julian raised his glass. "To 70 years of stubbornness and survival." I raised mine. We drank. He stood a few minutes later, dropping his napkin on the chair. "I'm going to settle up. Don't argue with me about it." He pointed at me again, then disappeared toward the host stand near the entrance. The piano shifted into something slower. I was reaching for the bread basket when I felt it, a presence moving toward the table with purpose. Not a waiter. The stride was wrong, too direct, too controlled. My hand stopped before it touched the bread. She was in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a gray coat that was just slightly too warm for the restaurant. She was scanning the room as she approached, not admiring it, reading it. Checking exits. Checking Julian's position near the front. She moved the way people move when they've been rehearsing the next 60 seconds in their head for hours. She reached our table and set down a small wooden box roughly the size of a hardcover book and a brass key beside it. Then she leaned down toward me and her voice came out barely above a breath. "Tonight when you're alone, open this." Every nerve in my body came back online at once. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "My name is Emma Hart." She held my gaze without flinching. "I'm Noah's girlfriend, and if you don't open that box tonight, he may not be alive by the end of the week." My chest tightened like a fist closing around my ribs. I started to speak, but she had already straightened up, already turned, already walking toward the side exit with the same quiet precision she had arrived with. By the time Julian's voice reached me from across the room, "Dad, they said the dessert menu is actually worth it tonight." Emma Hart was gone. I pressed the wooden box flat against my side and slid it into the inner pocket of my jacket in one motion. Old reflex, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Julian dropped back into his chair and topped off his wine. "You all right? You look pale." "Just an old memory," I said. "It comes with the age." He nodded and started talking about the party again. The menu, the guest list, whether the Hendersons from next door should be invited or if that was too neighborly for a milestone birthday. I answered when I needed to. I smiled when I needed to. But my hand kept finding its way back to the shape of that box beneath my jacket. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt the old familiar weight of a room that was a great deal more dangerous than it looked. The house on Greenview Avenue had been quiet for a long time before I sat down at my desk. Evelyn had gone to bed around 10 the way she always did, a glass of chamomile tea, 30 minutes of reading, lights out. I had kissed her on the forehead and told her I needed to review some old paperwork. She had looked at me the way she sometimes did, like she was reading a page she had already read before, and said, "Don't stay up too late, Marcus." I had said I wouldn't. That was a lie, and we both knew it. My home office was the one room in the house I had never let anyone redecorate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 2 walls, a mahogany desk that had belonged to my father, a reading lamp that threw a circle of amber light, and nothing more. It was the kind of room that encouraged honesty. There was nowhere comfortable to hide in it. I set the wooden box on the desk and placed the brass key beside it. For a while, I just looked at them. The box was old, not antique store old, but worn in the way things get worn when someone has handled them repeatedly, when they've been picked up and set down and carried around for weeks while someone worked up the nerve to let them go. The wood was smooth at the corners. Someone had sanded it. Someone had cared about this. I picked up the key. It was lighter than it looked. "All right," I said out loud to no one. The lock turned clean. Inside, a USB drive, 4 photographs, a folded map of the greater Chicago area with handwritten circles and route lines marked in red pen, a torn notebook page covered in small, careful handwriting, and a sealed envelope with 2 words written on the front in the same hand. The words read, "Dad, please." My throat closed around something I wasn't ready to name. I opened the envelope first. The letter inside was 2 pages front and back, written in Noah's handwriting. I would have recognized it anywhere, the way he pressed hard on his consonants and let his vowels run slightly wide. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means Emma found you, which means things have gotten worse than I hoped. I need you to know something before anything else. I don't want to hurt you. I never did. But about 3 months ago, someone came to me with a story about you, about who you were before I came to live with you. And for a little while, I'm not going to lie to you, I believed parts of it. I set the page down, picked it up again. I know how that sounds. I'm sorry. But you taught me not to take anything on faith without evidence. So instead of doing something I couldn't take back, I started digging. And what I found scared me a lot more than the story did. The USB drive held 7 files. I plugged it into my laptop and opened the first one, a recording. Noah's voice came through the speaker low and steady, the way he talked when he was concentrating on something difficult. "Dad, this is easier to say out loud than in writing, so I'm doing both." A pause. The sound of him exhaling slowly. "Someone told me you were responsible for my biological father's death, that you covered it up, that I've been calling my father's killer Dad for 30 years. Another pause, longer this time. "I didn't go to you. I know that hurt you, or it will when you hear this, but I couldn't. Not yet. Because whoever set this up knew exactly which buttons to push, and if I came to you angry and confused, I would have handed them exactly what they wanted." I pressed my knuckle hard against my mouth. "So I did what you always told me to do when I didn't know who to trust. I followed the evidence." His voice steadied. "Dad, there's a network. Warehouses, transport routes, shell companies, cash transfers structured to stay under federal reporting thresholds. That means each individual wire is kept below $10,000, so it doesn't trigger automatic IRS or FinCEN flags. Somebody built this carefully. Somebody who understood how law enforcement traces money. I've spent 3 months mapping it. The files on this drive are everything I've found." I opened the second file. A spreadsheet, dozens of rows of transactions, dates, amounts, receiving account numbers. The amounts ranged from $800 to $2,200 each, small enough to be invisible individually. Together, they formed a river. The third file was a series of photographs. Warehouses, loading docks, a garage in what looked like the Cicero area, pallets with shipping manifests, license plates. The fourth file was a scanned copy of corporate registration documents for 3 companies I had never heard of. I pulled up the map on the desk and matched the addresses. 2 of the warehouse locations aligned with the hand-drawn circles Noah had marked in red. I sat back and looked at all of it spread across my screen. Noah's voice was still playing from the recording. "I don't know who's running this, not yet, but whoever it is, they're the one who pointed a man named Rafael Cruz at me. They gave him just enough truth to make the lie believable, and they timed it. Dad, they timed it to land right after my accident when my head was already scrambled and I couldn't trust my own memory." His voice tightened the way it did when he was angry and trying not to show it. "This wasn't random. This was engineered. Somebody wanted me angry at you. Somebody needed me to make a move against you. And whoever that somebody is, they're right in the middle of everything on this drive." I opened the 5th file. It was a single scanned document, corporate registration paperwork. At the top, a company name. At the bottom, a signature line. The company was called Vail Meridian Logistics Incorporated in Illinois. I knew that name. I had driven past that building. I had shaken hands with the man whose name was typed below the company title on that registration page, the man whose signature sat at the bottom of every filed document, clean and confident and completely familiar. My son's signature. My other son's signature. I closed the laptop slowly. The amber lamp threw its circle of light across the desk, across the box, across the key still sitting where I had left it. Outside Chicago in October made no noise at all. I sat with what I had just seen for a long time, trying to find the version of this that made sense, the version where Julian's name on those documents was a coincidence, a mistake, a forgery. I tried very hard to find that version. I could not find it anywhere. The lamp on my desk was still burning when the memories came back. That happens sometimes. You stare at something long enough and the present dissolves and suddenly you're somewhere else entirely, wearing a name that isn't yours, in a life that fits like a coat 2 sizes too small. I was 40 years old the first time I became someone else for a living. His name was Marcus Riley, a mid-level freight broker with a history of looking the other way, a taste for poker, and exactly the kind of flexible ethics that Dante Moreno's organization found useful. It took me 8 months to build that identity from scratch. 8 months of paperwork, rehearsal, backstory construction, and learning how to drink bourbon like a man who had been doing it since college instead of switching to it at 39 for professional reasons. My handler at the time was a 20-year veteran named Garrett. On the day I went in, he sat across from me in a gray federal building and looked at me the way doctors look at patients before delivering results. "You understand what deep cover means," he said. It wasn't a question. "I understand," I said. "No phone calls home, no letters through regular mail. Your home address becomes a liability the moment it's associated with the name Marcus Riley, and if Moreno's people run a trace, your family is exposed." He folded his hands on the table. "You can use a secure federal relay for emergency contact only. 1 call per month, maximum 3 minutes, routed through a Chicago field office line." 1 call a month, I repeated. 3 minutes. He looked at me steadily. "If that's not something you can live with, tell me now." I thought about Evelyn. I thought about Julian, who was 7 years old and had started losing his first teeth and wanted me to be there every single time it happened. I thought about the look on his face the morning I'd told him Daddy was going away for a while for work. How long he had asked, one hand gripping the sleeve of my jacket. Not too long, I had said. That was a lie. I had known it when I said it. He had probably known it too, the way children always know the things adults are too cowardly to say out loud. "I can live with it," I told Garrett. He nodded, pushed a folder across the table and said, "Then you're Marcus Riley as of today." The next 3 years were the longest and the shortest of my life. Dante Moreno ran his organization the way a careful man runs a corporation, with layers, with buffers, with an instinct for loyalty that was almost admirable if you forgot what he was using it for. He wasn't the kind of man who shouted. He was the kind of man who got very quiet when he was angry, and everyone in the room understood that the quiet was worse. The first time I sat across from him at a poker table in a private room above a bar on the south side, he studied me for 45 minutes before he said a single word. "You're Marcus Riley," he said finally. "Last I checked," I said, "you brokered the Halstead Street warehouse deal for Vickers 2 years ago." "I did." "Vickers says you're reliable." He shuffled his cards without looking at them. "Vickers also said the same thing about 3 other people who turned out not to be, so understand that his endorsement means you get a seat at this table. It doesn't mean anything more than that." "Understood," I said. He looked at me for another long moment, and I held his gaze with the easy patience of a man who had absolutely nothing to hide, which was the only way to hold the gaze of a man like Dante Moreno. "Good," he said, and dealt the cards. I wrote to Julian every week. I couldn't send the letters. Garrett had been explicit about that, and he was right. A letter postmarked from a Southside address under a false name, sent to a residential address in Lincoln Park, would take approximately 48 hours to unravel everything I had spent 8 months building. And it would put Evelyn and Julian in the crosshairs of people who did not hesitate. So I wrote the letters, and I kept them. The first one I wrote on a Tuesday night in November 1992, sitting at a folding table in a studio apartment that smelled like someone else's cooking. Julian had turned 8 2 weeks before. I had missed it. "Julian, you're 8 years old today, or you were 2 weeks ago when I started writing this and didn't know how to finish it. I heard from your mother that you wanted a baseball glove, and that you got one, and that you hit the ball 3 times in a row in the backyard. I wish I could have been there to see that. I wish a lot of things. But here is what I want you to know, even if you can't hear it yet. Every day I'm away, I'm trying to make things safer. Not just for strangers, for you." I don't know if that makes sense to a kid. Maybe it doesn't have to yet. I folded it, I put it in an envelope, I wrote his name on the front, then I put it in a shoebox under the bed and went back to being Marcus Riley. The monthly calls to Evelyn were 3 minutes long, relayed through a federal line stripped of any identifying details. We had a code, nothing elaborate, just a set of ordinary phrases that meant specific things. "The weather here is fine" meant I was safe. "I've been thinking about that vacation we talked about" meant I needed her to know I was thinking about home. "Give my love to the family" meant I missed Julian so badly it was a physical thing, like a bruise on the inside of my chest that never fully healed. I said that last one every single call. One evening in the spring of 1993, Evelyn said something that cracked me open in a way that none of Dante's people ever managed. "Julian asked me today why dads have to go away," she said. Her voice was steady, the way she made it steady when she didn't want me to hear that she was struggling. "He said some of his friends' dads work in offices and they come home every night." My throat locked up. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that some dads have jobs that are harder to explain." A pause. He said, "Is Dad coming back?" And I said, "Of course he is." Another pause. "Marcus, you are coming back." "I'm coming back," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Evelyn, I promise." "Okay." She exhaled slowly. "Okay. The weather here is fine, by the way." It was our code for "I love you and I'm holding on and please don't make me a widow" all at once. "Give my love to the family," I said. The line clicked off at exactly 3 minutes. I sat in that studio apartment for a long time afterward, my hand still on the receiver, the shoebox under the bed getting heavier with every letter I added to it. Julian was growing up, and I was missing every single day of it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known yet, was that the night the operation finally ended would give me a reason to stay away just a little longer. And this time it wouldn't be the job that kept me. It would be a 4-year-old boy hiding under a table with blood on his shoes. December 1995, the South Side of Chicago, 11:40 at night. That was the night Marcus Riley ceased to exist. The warehouse on Halsted Street had been under surveillance for 6 weeks before the order came down to move. By then, I had been inside Moreno's organization for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days, long enough to know the layout of every room, the schedule of every guard rotation, and the particular way Dante Moreno's voice changed when he was deciding whether someone needed to disappear. We went in fast and hard, the way Garrett had always said. A clean operation should end with overwhelming force and minimal hesitation. 12 agents at the 3 entry points, 2 backup units on the street, and me on the inside with my cover blown the moment the doors came down, and every face in that building turned toward the federal badges coming through the smoke. 3 years of being Marcus Riley ended in approximately 45 seconds. The shooting started near the east loading dock. I was on the ground behind a steel column when I heard Dante's voice cut through the noise, not panicked, not pleading, but furious, in the way of a man who cannot believe the world has failed to cooperate with his intentions. "You set me up!" His voice came from somewhere to my left, tight with rage. 3 years. You sat at my table for 3 years. I straightened up and found him across 15 feet of warehouse floor, a gun already raised. His hand was steady. His eyes were not. "Dante." I kept my voice even. "Put it down. There's nowhere to go." "I trusted you," he said, and his voice cracked on the word trusted in a way that almost sounded like grief. I know, I said. Put it down. He didn't put it down. What happened next was fast and irreversible and exactly as ugly as those things always are. Two agents moved from his left flank. Dante turned toward the movement. Shots were fired from at least 3 directions in the span of 2 seconds. By the time the echo died, Dante Moreno was on the floor and the warehouse had gone very, very still. I stood there for a moment with my ears ringing and my heart slamming against my sternum. I had been in firefights before. They never got easier. Anyone who told you they did was either lying or broken in ways they hadn't noticed yet. Garrett appeared at my shoulder. You all right? Fine, I said. My voice sounded like someone else's. Good work, Marcus. He clapped me once on the arm. 3 years. That's the longest deep cover operation this office has run in a decade. It's over. It should have felt like relief. It felt like standing at the bottom of a very deep hole looking up at a circle of sky. I started moving through the warehouse because movement was the only thing that made sense. Checking corners, clearing rooms, doing the job because the job was the only language I still knew how to speak. I found him in the back office. He was under a heavy wooden table pressed against the far wall, knees pulled to his chest, eyes so wide they looked like they were trying to see everything and nothing at the same time. He couldn't have been more than 4 years old. He was wearing pajamas with small yellow trucks on them, and on his feet were a pair of sneakers that someone had laced carefully, both bows perfectly even. There was blood on the right shoe. Not his, the splatter pattern was wrong for that. He had been near something terrible and had not been touched by it, and somehow that made it worse. He didn't cry. That was the thing that stopped me cold. He didn't cry. He just looked at me with those enormous eyes, and his whole small body was vibrating like a tuning fork that had been struck too hard. Hey! I crouched down slowly, Han's visible voice as low and steady as I could make it. Hey, I'm not going to hurt you, okay? I'm not going to hurt you. He didn't move. What's your name? Nothing. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. My name is Marcus, I said. I'm going to stay right here until you're ready. We've got time. We didn't have time. The building was still being cleared. Garrett was going to want a full accounting in about 10 minutes, and a 4-year-old child at a crime scene was a complication that the after-action report was going to have a very specific process for handling. But I didn't move. I stayed crouched on the cold concrete floor of that back office and waited. After maybe 2 minutes, he said one word, Noah. Noah, I repeated. That's a good name. Noah, do you want to come out from under there? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached out one small hand and I took it, and he let me pull him gently out from under the table. He pressed his face against my shoulder and grabbed the front of my jacket with both fists, and I felt that grip all the way down to somewhere I didn't have a name for. 3 days later, I sat across from Evelyn at our kitchen table in Lincoln Park. Noah was in the next room asleep on the couch with a blanket Evelyn had put over him temporarily through the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services emergency placement process while we started the paperwork for formal foster licensing. The DCFS worker had been clear the process would take months, there were no guarantees, and the child's welfare was the only consideration. I had said I understood. Evelyn had said she understood. Then we had looked at each other across that table. His father's gone, I said. He has no documented next of kin willing to come forward. He's 4 years old and he watched... My voice stopped working for a second. I pushed through it. He watched things no 4-year-old should ever see. And right now he's asleep on our couch because there was nowhere else to take him tonight that felt safe enough. Evelyn looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. Then we do the paperwork, she said. Whatever it takes. We do the paperwork. It could take 6 months. More. Then it takes 6 months. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Marcus, he reached for you. In the middle of all that, he reached for you. That means something. From upstairs, the sound of small feet on the landing. Julian appeared at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, squinting at the kitchen light. Dad? His voice was rough with sleep. You're home. My chest filled up with something I couldn't contain. I stood up and crossed to the stairs and pulled my son into a hug that probably scared him with its intensity. Yeah, I said into his hair. I'm home. He hugged me back hard. Then he pulled back and looked up at me with the direct, unsentimental gaze that children reserve for things they genuinely need to understand. Who's the little kid on the couch? I looked down at my son, my firstborn, my blood. The boy I had missed every day for 3 years. I crouched down to his level the way I had crouched in that warehouse, and I tried to find words that were honest without being more than an 8-year-old could carry. "His name is Noah," I said. "He got lost. We're going to help him find his way." Julian looked toward the living room. His face was unreadable in the way children's faces go unreadable when they are processing something they haven't decided how to feel about yet. Then he looked back at me. "For how long?" "We don't know yet," I said. He nodded slowly, pulled his bottom lip between his teeth, then he turned and went back upstairs without another word. I watched him go, and I told myself it was fine, that he just needed time, that 8-year-olds were resilient and adaptable, and Julian would come around once he understood. I believed that for a very long time. I was wrong for every single year of it. The coffee was hot, and the morning was gray, and I had been sitting at the kitchen table for 40 minutes without drinking either. The USB drive was in my shirt pocket. I kept reaching up and touching it the way a man touches a bruise, not because it helps, but because stopping feels worse. Outside, the oak tree in the backyard had gone almost fully yellow. October in Chicago doesn't ease you into winter. It drops a season on you like a verdict. I thought about Julian. Not the Julian from last night at the restaurant, the one who smiled and poured wine and talked about party venues with the easy confidence of a man who had everything under control. I thought about the Julian I had watched grow up in pieces from a distance and then up close once I came home, trying to compress 3 years of absence into whatever time we had left. I thought about the first time I visited his office downtown. It was about 14 months ago, maybe 15. Julian had invited me for lunch, one of those invitations that felt like a gesture but carried an undercurrent of something I couldn't name at the time. His company occupied the entire 6th floor of a building on West Madison, Vail Meridian Logistics. The lobby had a receptionist who smiled like she'd been trained to do at a wall of monitors showing live tracking data for freight shipments and more employees than made any sense for a mid-size regional logistics firm. I remembered thinking, where does the revenue come from to support this kind of overhead? I had filed the thought away and forgotten it because Julian had clapped me on the shoulder and taken me to a nice restaurant 2 blocks over and talked the whole time about expanding into international freight. And I had been so relieved to have a normal conversation with my son that I had not asked the question out loud. I asked it now alone at my kitchen table, turning the USB drive over in my fingers. I pulled out my laptop and opened the spreadsheet Noah had compiled. The transactions were organized by date amount and receiving account. Each wire was between $800 and $2,200, carefully structured to stay below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold that triggers automatic review by the IRS and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network known as FinCEN. Anyone moving money in amounts that consistently stay just under that ceiling is either very careful or very experienced. Usually both. I had seen this pattern before. Twice, in fact, once in a case in 1998 involving a Southside bookmaking operation, and once in 2003 during a joint task force investigation of a freight company being used to layer narcotics proceeds through legitimate invoices. Both times it had taken us 8 months to untangle the structure. Noah had done it in 3. "Smart kid," I said out loud to the empty kitchen and felt the back of my throat tighten. I pulled up the satellite map on my laptop and began cross-referencing the receiving addresses against the hand-drawn circles on Noah's paper map. 4 addresses matched exactly. A 5th was half a block off, close enough to be relevant. I marked them. Then I started on the corporate registration documents. 3 shell companies, formally registered in Illinois, all listed as active. 2 had the same registered agent, a law firm on North LaSalle Street, that I did not recognize. The 3rd listed a different agent entirely, a name I had never encountered. I wrote both names down. Then I went back to the Vail Meridian Incorporation documents and stared at Julian's signature for a while. In 30 years of undercover work, I had looked at a lot of signatures. You learn to read them the way handwriting analysts do, the pressure, the consistency, the small variations that indicate stress or haste or deliberate care. Julian's signature on those documents was even unhurried and identical across 6 different pages. This was not a man who had been pressured into signing. This was a man who had signed the same documents many times and no longer thought about it. My jaw hurt. I had been clenching it without noticing. I stood up, poured the cold coffee down the sink, and made a fresh cup. Evelyn appeared in the doorway in her robe, her silver hair still down from sleep. She looked at the laptop, at the papers spread across the table, at the expression on my face. Her own expression did the thing it always did when she was deciding how much to say. "How long have you been up?" she asked. Couple hours. She crossed to the counter and poured herself a cup. The thing Emma gave you yesterday. Yes. Is it bad? I looked at my wife. This woman who had raised 2 children mostly alone while I was someone else for 3 years, who had made every school play, every broken bone, every nightmare at 2 in the morning her singular responsibility, who had done all of it without complaint and with a steadiness that still at 70 made me feel like the lesser half of this partnership. I don't know yet, I said. I need to talk to someone who still has access to things I can't reach on my own. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her mug and studied me over the rim. Someone from before. Yes. How long since you've called this person? 2 years, give or take. She looked at me for a beat longer than felt comfortable. Then you'd better call them before you talk yourself out of it. She took her coffee and went back toward the hallway. At the doorway, she paused without turning around. Marcus, she said quietly. Yeah. Whatever it is, we deal with it together, the way we always have. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles had gone white around that mug. Don't you dare try to carry it alone. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. After she was gone, I sat at that table for another 5 minutes listening to the house. The tick of the radiator, a car going by outside, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Tuesday morning in Lincoln Park. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. It rang 3 times. A voice I recognized immediately, low, unhurried, slightly raspy from decades of bad coffee and worse hours, came through the line. Well, the voice said, I wondered when you were going to call. You knew I'd call, I said. Marcus. A short pause. I've been waiting for 3 weeks. My hand tightened on the phone, and the cold feeling that had been sitting in my chest since last night dropped about 2 inches lower. We need to meet, I said. Not on the phone. Tomorrow, the voice said. Wicker Park, the coffee place on Milwaukee, the small one with the green door, 2 o'clock. I'll be there. Bring everything she gave you, the voice said, and Marcus, don't tell anyone you're coming, not even Evelyn. The line went quiet. I set the phone down on the table and looked at the oak tree through the kitchen window. The last of the yellow leaves were letting go one by one, drifting down through the gray October air. 3 weeks. Elias Ward had been waiting 3 weeks for me to call, which meant whatever was coming, I was not the first person to see it. The coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue had a green door and no sign. The people who knew about it wanted to keep it that way. I arrived at 1:55. Elias Ward was already there, corner table back to the wall sightline, to both the entrance and the side window. The same way he had always sat in every room for 40 years, because habits formed in dangerous places do not retire just because you do. He was 72 now, weathered in the way of a man who had seen too much and stopped being surprised by any of it. A cup of black coffee sat in front of him. A manila folder was tucked under his jacket on the chair beside him. He looked up when I walked in, quick assessment, automatic checking whether I'd been followed, whether my expression matched the situation, or was hiding something worse. Then he nodded once, and I sat down. You look tired, he said. 36 hours, I said. He pushed a second cup across the table. Black, no sugar. You haven't changed that, have you? No. Rain began tapping the window. The espresso machine hissed somewhere behind the counter. Elias, you said you'd been waiting 3 weeks. What do you know? He wrapped both hands around his mug. Let me start with what I can prove. Then I'll tell you what I suspect. He reached under his jacket, pulled out the folder, and set it between us. The Moreno operation, December 1995. Dante Moreno died in a multi-agent crossfire during a federal arrest warrant execution. You were present as a deep cover asset. You did not discharge your weapon. The shots that killed Moreno came from 2 Bureau agents on the east flank. It is documented in the original after-action report, which I have kept a personal copy of since 1996. He tapped the folder. It matters now. Something unknotted in my chest that I hadn't realized had been knotted. You kept it. I kept everything. He slid a single page toward me. Your conduct was clean. Moreno's death was lawful use of force during a felony arrest. No legal or professional basis for any claim you acted improperly. He paused. Which means anyone who told Noah otherwise was either badly misinformed or deliberately lying. Rafael Cruz, I said. Elias's jaw tightened. Still alive. I confirmed it 2 weeks ago through a CPD contact. He's been living under a work alias on the South Side for nearly a decade. Small time at first collection work transport. About a year ago, he started moving up. He tapped the folder again. Someone put money behind him. Someone gave him a reason to surface and a target. Noah. Cruz approached him 4 months ago, told him Dante was his biological father, told him you were responsible for Dante's death, gave him just enough truth to make the lie land. He looked at me carefully. How did Noah take it? He didn't go for revenge, I said. Something that felt like pride moved through my chest, warm and painful at the same time. He investigated. Elias's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but close. Good kid. He's a good man, I said. Elias nodded, then pulled out a second page. The accident. 3 months ago, Noah's car, a 2019 Honda Civic single-vehicle collision on the Eisenhower. Official report, driver error, late-breaking overcorrection. Case closed. But, I said. A mechanic I trust reviewed the incident photos. He turned the page toward me. The brake line had been partially severed, not cut clean, pinched, and abraded, the kind of damage that builds progressive failure. The line doesn't go all at once. It degrades gradually until the driver notices the brakes going soft or doesn't notice until it's too late. He paused. Noah was on the expressway when it gave out. Concussion, laceration above his left ear, 14 stitches. My hands had gone flat on the table. I could feel my own pulse in my palms. Criminal tampering with a vehicle causing bodily injury, I said. Class 2 felony in Illinois, minimum 3 years. Correct, and whoever did it had either mechanical knowledge or access to someone who did. This wasn't street-level work. Elias held my gaze. They wanted the old memories to surface. The head trauma, the disorientation. They needed Noah confused and angry, not dead. The accident was engineered to crack him open so Raphael could walk in. Which means the whole sequence was planned, I said. The accident Cruz the timing. Someone built this specifically to use Noah as a weapon against me. Yes. His voice dropped half a register. And before you ask, the last time someone came to me asking about the Moreno operation was not Noah. It was 18 months ago. Someone called my old bureau extension, said they were a journalist doing a retrospective on organized crime takedowns in the 90s. You didn't believe them. I've talked to enough liars to recognize one by the rhythm of their questions. This person wasn't looking for a story. They wanted confirmation of specific facts, what happened to Noah after the raid, whether he'd been told anything about his biological father, whether records linked him back to Moreno. He leaned forward slightly. I didn't give them anything, but I noted the callback number they left. He slid a third piece of paper across the table. A phone number, Chicago area code. My eyes dropped to it, and the world went very still. I recognized it immediately. I had dialed that number 100 times. I had watched it light up on my phone at holidays, birthdays, ordinary Wednesday evenings. My throat locked. I breathed through my nose. Elias, I said, barely above a sound. This number. I know whose it is, Marcus. His voice was quiet, careful. The voice of a man who had been dreading this moment for 3 weeks. I was waiting for you to find your own way to the same door before I opened it. I stared at that piece of paper. The callback number Julian had left with Elias Ward 18 months ago, asking about Noah, asking about Dante Moreno, asking about things that only mattered to someone already building a plan. My son, my firstborn, my blood. He's been planning this for at least 18 months, I said, and the words felt like pulling a splinter out of bone. At least, Elias said. Outside, rain hit the green door and ran down the glass in long, uneven lines. And neither of us spoke because some things need a moment before they become real. 2 days after I watched 30 years of careful assumptions collapse into a phone number on a piece of paper, I went to find Emma Hart. Noah had been thorough. Tucked behind the last page of his letter in handwriting so small I had almost missed it was a single line. If you need to reach Emma directly, Logan Square, 2847, North Kedzie Apartment 3F. She knows you might come. She's ready. He had prepared for every contingency. Even this one. The building on North Kedzie was a 3-flat with a worn front stoop and a buzzer panel that had seen better decades. I pressed 3F at 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday collar turned up against a wind that had decided October was already finished. The intercom crackled. Who is it? Oh, Marcus Vale, I said. A pause. Then the door buzzed open without another word. Emma answered before I finished climbing the stairs, late 20s, dark hair loose, wearing a university sweatshirt, and the expression of someone relieved that a difficult conversation was finally about to happen. She stepped back and held the door open. Come in, Mr. Vale. Marcus, I said. Marcus. She closed the door. The apartment was small and completely lived in. Transit manifests and freight routing documents covered the kitchen table. 2 laptops sat open side by side. A whiteboard on the wall was covered in handwritten route numbers and connecting lines. Emma worked in logistics data analysis, and her apartment looked exactly like someone who had decided the office was wherever she happened to be sitting. She poured 2 coffees without asking and set one in front of me. Noah talked about you constantly, she said. Before any of this. He talked about you the way people talk about someone they've spent their whole life trying to live up to. Something moved in my chest that I had no intention of showing. Where is he now? Safe. I won't tell you where not because I don't trust you, but because fewer people knowing means fewer ways it reaches the wrong ears. She met my eyes steadily. You understand that better than most. I do, I said. He wanted to come to you himself. Her voice dropped, and for the first time I heard the strain beneath the composure, the exhaustion of someone who had been frightened for a long time and learned to function around it. When Raphael first approached him, Noah's initial reaction wasn't rage. He called me that night and said, "Something doesn't add up. Not anger, not grief, just something doesn't add up." That sounds exactly like him, I said. The accident shook him. Emma pressed her palms flat on the counter. After the concussion, memories started returning in fragments. Sounds, shapes, flashes of light. He'd wake at 3 in the morning with his heart hammering, gripped by something terrible he couldn't quite see the edges of. Her jaw tightened. Raphael timed his visits for those moments. He'd appear when Noah was disoriented and fragile, feeding him just enough to keep the wound open without ever completing the picture. Classic manipulation, I said. Keep the target off balance, never enough to verify or refute, just enough to sustain the doubt. Exactly. But here's what Raphael didn't count on. Emma moved to the whiteboard and tapped a cluster of route numbers. Noah doesn't act on doubt. He acts on evidence. He started following Raphael to understand who was behind him, and he found a distribution network, warehouses, transport routes, shell companies. He mapped it using my access to freight routing databases. My job involves auditing anomalous shipping patterns so I have legitimate access to commercial and industrial routing data. He used your professional access, I said. I gave it to him willingly, she said with a directness that left no room for misunderstanding. I knew what he was doing, and I chose to help. Whatever legal exposure that creates for me, I'll deal with it. One thing, I said. Why the wooden box? Why a physical handoff at a restaurant instead of an encrypted file drop? Emma's expression tightened. Because Julian had remote monitoring software on Noah's devices. Every file sent from Noah's phone or laptop passes through a server Julian's people control. A physical handoff at a public location, no electronic trail was the only way to reach you without Julian seeing it the moment it moved. I looked at this young woman, the steadiness in her eyes, the whiteboard behind her, the laptops humming quietly, and felt the kind of respect that has nothing to do with rank and everything to do with what a person does when it genuinely costs them something. He's lucky to have you, I said. Emma's composure cracked for just a moment. Something raw underneath the face of someone terrified and exhausted and deeply in love with a person in serious danger. Her eyes went bright and wet before she blinked it back. He'd better be worth all of this, she said, her voice coming out rougher than intended. She laughed at herself, short, broken. She slid a folder across the counter. Noah left this 3 weeks ago. It's not on the USB, it's the part that scared him most. He said if his father ever comes here in person, give him this. I opened it. Pages of handwritten notes in Noah's careful script. At the top of the first page, underlined twice. Someone is feeding Raphael information from inside. Someone who knows this family. Someone who knew exactly which memories to target and when Noah would be most vulnerable. Noah had listed everyone family-adjacent contacts, anyone who knew both the 1995 operation and the accident. He had narrowed it to 4 names. 3 I could eliminate immediately. 2 were dead. 1 had been out of the country for 6 years. The 4th name was circled in red at the bottom of the last page with a single question mark beside it. My knuckles went white around the paper. He didn't know for certain, Emma said, watching my face. That's why it's a question mark. He needed more before he could believe it. She paused. Can you believe it? I looked at that circled name for a long time. I don't know yet, I said, but I'm going to find out. I left the folder with Emma and walked back out into the cold October evening. The wind had picked up rattling dry leaves along the sidewalk with a sound like whispered warnings. Somewhere in this city, someone had been watching my family for 18 months, learning its architecture, mapping its fault lines, building a machine designed to use my sons against each other. The question that followed me all the way to my car was the one I had been pushing away since the moment Elias slid that phone number across the table. Not whether Julian was involved, but how deep the damage went, and whether anything would be left standing when it was over. I got home at 6:30, told Evelyn I had some calls to make, and went straight to my office. The folder Noah had left with Emma was on my desk beside the USB. I did not open it again. I already knew what the circled name at the bottom of the last page said, and looking at it again was not going to change it. What I needed now was not confirmation of what I suspected. I needed the kind of evidence that could stand up in a federal courtroom, the kind that could not be dismissed, reframed, or explained away. In 30 years of undercover work, the single most reliable way to prove what a person was doing was to follow what they did with their money. People lie with their words, their faces, their alibis, and their alibis. But money leaves marks. Money always leaves marks. The trick is knowing where to look and how to read what you find. I spread Noah's spreadsheet across my second monitor and pulled up a fresh legal pad. The first call I made was to Lena Cross. Lena was 34 years old and had been a special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Chicago for 6 years. I had worked with her briefly on a consulting basis 2 years before my retirement when her unit was building a RICO case against a construction company with ties to a South Side crew. She was meticulous, careful, and possessed of the particular quality that separates good investigators from great ones. She did not fall in love with her first theory. She followed the evidence wherever it went, even when it went somewhere inconvenient. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Vale." Her voice was brisk and professional, but underneath it there was something alert, the tone of someone who had been expecting a call they weren't sure would come. "It's been a while." "It has," I said. "I need a favor. Off the books for now. Preliminary only. I'm not asking you to open anything official until we see where this leads." A pause. "What kind of preliminary?" "I have a series of wire transfers. Structured below the $10,000 FinCEN reporting threshold, I'm looking at amounts between 800 and 220 repeated weekly spread across 15 to 20 different receiving accounts over an 8-month period." I kept my voice flat and professional, the way I had learned to keep it when the subject matter was personal enough to make my hands want to shake. "The receiving accounts appear to connect to a cluster of shell companies registered in Illinois. I need someone to run the corporate registry, confirm the ownership chain, and trace the accounts to whatever entity sits at the top." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear Lena tapping a pen against something. "That pattern you're describing," she said carefully, "is textbook structuring. Deliberately breaking up transactions to avoid mandatory reporting is a federal offense under the Bank Secrecy Act, 31 U.S.C. Section 5324. If this is what it sounds like, it's not just a financial crime. It's a predicate offense for a money laundering charge, which means RICO exposure if there's an underlying criminal enterprise." "I know what it means," I said. "I know you know." Another beat. "Marcus? Whose money is this?" I looked at the legal pad in front of me. Julian's name was written at the top in my own handwriting, underlined once. "I don't want to say until you've run the numbers independently," I said. "I need you to come to the same conclusion without my name on it. If I tell you first, it contaminates the chain." Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Send me the account numbers and the receiving addresses. I'll run a preliminary trace through FinCEN's database and the Illinois Secretary of State Corporate Registry. No official case file, no subpoenas, just a look. If what I find rises to the level of probable cause, we talk about next steps." "That's all I'm asking," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow morning." I sent her the files from Noah's USB encrypted through a secure transfer protocol she and I had used during the consulting work 2 years prior. Then I hung up and turned back to the spreadsheet on my own screen. The receiving accounts had addresses. I had already matched 4 to locations on Noah's map. Now I went back to the 3 I had set aside, the ones that didn't immediately correspond to a physical location. The first 2 resolved quickly. One was a registered agent address for a law firm, the same North LaSalle firm listed on 2 of the shell company registrations. The second was a post office box in Cicero. The third address stopped me. It was a residential address in Evanston, a house, which meant either someone had been genuinely sloppy, unlikely given how carefully everything else in this network had been structured, or this account was connected to a person, not a company. A person who received direct transfers and didn't bother routing them through a corporate layer. I wrote the Evanston address on the legal pad and circled it. Then I pulled up the Illinois Secretary of State's Public Business Registry and started working through the shell companies one by one. The registry is publicly accessible. Anyone can search registered business names, filing dates, registered agents, and officer information. It is not glamorous investigative work. It is the kind of work that looks from the outside exactly like a retired man sitting at a desk reading bureaucratic documents at 9 o'clock at night, which is precisely what I was doing. The first two companies hit dead ends, both listed the same registered agent law firm, which meant I would need Lena's subpoena power to get behind that layer. The third company was registered under a different agent. The officer listed was a name I didn't recognize, a Gerald Foss of Oak Park, Illinois. I searched Gerald Foss. He had 2 public records, a 2019 civil judgment for an unpaid contractor debt of $11,000 and a business license for a small landscaping operation that had been dissolved in 2021. Gerald Foss was not a businessman or a lawyer or a logistics executive. Gerald Foss was a man who had owed someone $11,000 and probably hadn't asked too many questions when someone offered to make that problem go away in exchange for his name on some paperwork. A nominee. A front man, someone whose name appeared on documents so that someone else's name wouldn't have to. I picked up the phone and called Lena back. "One more thing," I said when she answered. "I need you to add a name to the search, Gerald Foss, Oak Park. He's listed as an officer on one of the shell companies." "Got it," Lena said. Then in a different tone, "Marcus, this is connected to something active, isn't it? This isn't a cold case." "No," I said. "It is not a cold case." She exhaled slowly. "How much time do we have?" I thought about the party Julian had already booked. 3rd Saturday in November, Vail Meridian Logistics, 18 months of planning. 3 weeks, I said, maybe less. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Lena said with the steady calm of someone who runs toward problems rather than away from them, "Then I'll have preliminary results by 8 tomorrow morning." She hung up. I set the phone down and looked at the legal pad. Julian's name at the top. Gerald Foss circled below it. The Evanston address beside it. Lines connecting them, evidence beginning to accumulate around a center of gravity that I already knew the shape of, even if I couldn't yet say the name out loud without my voice wanting to fail me. I stayed at that desk until 2 in the morning because the answers were in the numbers and the numbers did not care how much the answers hurt. Before I go any further, leave a "still here" in the comments. I need to know you're with me because the next part of this story is where everything I thought I knew about trust started to collapse. Quick note, parts of this story are shaped by fiction for depth and impact. If you'd rather not continue, this is a good place to pause, but I think you'll want to stay. Lena called at 7:58 in the morning, 2 minutes before she said she would, which told me she had been up as long as I had. "I have preliminary results," she said. Her voice was careful in the way voices get careful when the information is worse than expected. "You were right about the structuring pattern. Every transfer stayed between $900 and $2,100. Across 8 months, the total moved through those accounts is approximately $430,000. That's enough for a federal structuring charge on its own before we even get to what the money was funding." "And the corporate chain," I said. 3 shell companies registered in Illinois. 2 trace back to that North LaSalle law firm. I'm not going to touch those until I have a subpoena because the moment I call them, they call their client. The third company, the one with Gerald Foss as the listed officer, connects directly to a warehouse operation in Cicero. A pause. The warehouse is registered under a commercial lease held by Vail Meridian Logistics. I had been expecting it. I had been telling myself I was expecting it. It still landed like a fist in the center of my chest. "All right," I said. "Marcus," Lena's voice dropped. "The Evanston address you flagged, the one receiving direct transfers. I ran it. The property is owned by a man named Malcolm Drake. He's currently a detective with Chicago PD assigned to the Organized Crime Division. A beat. He's been on the force for 24 years. I pulled his personnel file. He had a senior officer listed as a professional reference when he made detective in 2001. I already knew what she was going to say before she said it. "That reference was you," Lena said. The coffee mug in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. I set it down on the desk before I dropped it. "Marcus Drake is receiving direct transfers from a shell company connected to Vail Meridian," Lena continued, and I could hear her choosing her words with the precision of someone who understood exactly how much weight each one carried. "He is currently assigned to the division that would be responsible for investigating any organized crime activity connected to a Chicago logistics company. If Julian Vail's operation ever came across the radar of the organized crime unit, Detective Drake would be in a position to know about it, slow walk it, redirect it, or make it disappear entirely. He's been running protection, I said. My voice came out flat. Inside the department. That's what the money looks like, Lena said. I can't prove it yet without a formal investigation, but the pattern is there. She paused. I'm sorry, Marcus. I know he was yours. I had written Malcolm Drake's recommendation letter for Detective Sergeant. I had sat across from him in a conference room in 2001 and told him he had the instincts to go far in this department if he stayed honest. He had looked at me with something that I had taken for gratitude and said, I learned from the best, sir. Now I sat in my office and felt something that was not quite grief and not quite fury, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. I need eyes on him, I said. Not official, not yet. If he gets a whisper that we're looking at him, he tips off Julian and everything moves up. Agreed, Lena said. What are you thinking? I want to see him in person, I said. I have a photograph of Adrian Knox from Noah's files. Knox is listed as warehouse operations manager for one of the Cicero facilities. I want to see if Drake and Knox have any in-person contact. If you observe them together in a public location, that's your business, Lena said carefully. I can't officially sanction that, but I also can't stop a private citizen from going where private citizens are allowed to go. Understood, I said. She gave me Malcolm's last known regular location, a parking structure near the Organized Crime Unit's field office on West Harrison where he routinely met with informants off the books. 3 p.m, most Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was a Thursday. I parked 2 levels up and walked down to the second floor where I had a clear sight line to the ground level entrance. I had Malcolm's department photo on my phone pulled from a public CPD directory. I had a photograph of Adrian Knox from Noah's files, mid-40s, broad shoulders, a thick beard, and the permanent squint of a man who spent most of his time in poorly lit warehouses. I did not have long to wait. Malcolm arrived at 2:57 in a gray sedan. He was heavier than I remembered. It had been 4 years since I had seen him at my retirement party, and the years had thickened him, settled into his face and shoulders. He moved with the particular careful authority of a man who had been a cop long enough to have it embedded in his posture. He parked, looked around the structure with a sweep that was too practiced to be casual, and took out his phone. 3 minutes later, a second car pulled in. The man who got out matched Adrian Knox's photograph, precisely the beard, the squint, the particular way he held his shoulders like someone accustomed to moving heavy things. They met between the 2 cars. Knox reached into his jacket and produced a thick envelope. Malcolm took it without looking at it, slid it inside his own jacket, and said something that made Knox nod twice and pull out his own phone to show Malcolm something on the screen. My jaw hurt. My hands were flat against my thighs, very still, because the alternative was putting them through something. I had written this man's recommendation letter. I had told a room full of senior officers that Malcolm Drake had the integrity to serve this city at the highest level. I had been wrong, and whatever part I had played in elevating him to a position where he could do this kind of damage, that was something I was going to have to carry, regardless of how everything else turned out. Knox got back in his car and left. Malcolm stayed a moment longer, looked around the structure one more time, and then walked back toward his sedan. His gaze swept the upper levels. I was behind a concrete pillar. I did not move. He looked in my direction for 2 seconds, saw nothing that concerned him, and got in his car. I waited until his taillights disappeared before I let out the breath I had been holding. On the drive home, I called Lena. I have visual confirmation, I said. Drake and Knox met in person. Knox passed an envelope. I couldn't see the contents, but the exchange was consistent with a cash payment in a location chosen to avoid surveillance. How close were you? Lena asked. Close enough to see Knox show Drake something on a phone screen. Good. Lena's voice had gone fully professional, now the brisk, focused tone of someone shifting from preliminary to operational. That gives me enough to open a formal parallel inquiry through the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Drake is CPD, which means Internal Affairs has primary jurisdiction, but because the underlying activity crosses into federal financial crimes and potential RICO, the Bureau can run concurrent. How long before the inquiry is visible to anyone inside CPD, I asked. 72 hours minimum before any paperwork touches a desk Drake might access, Lena said. Probably longer if I route it correctly. I need more than 72 hours, I said. I need 3 weeks. Lena paused. Marcus, whatever you're building toward, you need to tell me. I thought about the party, the Langham, 3rd Saturday in November. Julian's name on every document, every wire transfer, every shell company registration. 18 months of planning. I will tell you everything, I said, when the time is right. For now, I need you to trust me the way I'm trusting you. A long pause. 3 weeks, Lena said finally. But Marcus, after that, this moves at my pace and on my terms. Agreed. Agreed, I said. I drove the rest of the way home thinking about Malcolm Drake's face at my retirement party 4 years ago. The handshake, the genuine seeming smile, the words he had said. You were the reason I stayed honest, Mr. Vale. I had believed him. I was still not sure which was worse, that he had lied or that I had never thought to check. 3 days after I watched Malcolm Drake pocket a cash envelope in a parking structure, someone tried to kill me on the Eisenhower Expressway. It was a Sunday night just past 11. I had spent the evening at Lena's field office on West Adams, not the main FBI building, but a smaller satellite office she used for sensitive preliminary work, going over the corporate registry documents and cross-referencing Knox's warehouse locations against the transport routes in Noah's files. The meeting had run long. I had told Evelyn I would be home by 9, which meant she was already worried, which meant I was driving faster than I should have been on a wet November road. The truck first appeared in my rearview mirror about 2 miles past the Cicero Avenue interchange. A black Ford F25, running without front plates. It was sitting 2 car lengths behind me, which was close but not aggressive. I noticed it the way you notice things after 30 years of training, not consciously, just a small flag in the back of the brain that says that vehicle has been there too long. I changed lanes. The truck changed lanes. I moved back to the center lane, dropping my speed by 10 miles per hour. The truck matched it exactly. My hands tightened on the wheel, and every nerve in my body went cold and sharp the way they used to go cold and sharp in the field when a situation shifted from uncertain to dangerous. "All right," I said out loud to the empty car. "All right." I reached for my phone and dialed Elias. 2 rings. "I have a tail," I said the moment he picked up. "Black F25, Eisenhower westbound, I'm passing the Costner exit. No front plates." Elias's voice came back immediately, completely awake, with no trace of a man who had been asleep 30 seconds ago. "I know about the truck." I blinked. "What?" "I've been behind you since you left the West Adams office," Elias said, and there was something in his voice that was half apology and half the iron certainty of a man who had made a decision he stood behind completely. "I picked up a tail on your car 3 days ago, a different vehicle rotating through, but the same pattern. Someone has been watching your movements. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd tell me to stand down, and I wasn't going to stand down." The truck surged forward, suddenly closing the gap to half a car length. I floored the accelerator. "Elias, where are you?" "4 cars back, left lane. When I move, get to the right shoulder and hold your line. Do not brake hard." The truck swung left directly alongside me, and for one terrible second I could see the silhouette of the driver, dark jacket face turned toward me, deliberate. This was not a warning. This was a man who had been given a job and was doing it. The truck cut right, slamming into the front quarter panel of my car. The impact wrenched the steering wheel hard in my hands. My shoulder cracked against the door, and pain fired up through my neck like a current. I held the wheel, both hands white-knuckled, fighting the pull toward the concrete barrier on the right. "Elias, coming." A pair of headlights blazed on from the left lane, 4 cars back, and Elias's vehicle accelerated with the kind of controlled ferocity that told me he had done this before and recently. He pulled alongside the truck, and I watched in my mirror as he matched its speed, exactly cutting off its room to maneuver, trapping it between his car and the left lane barrier. The truck driver had 2 choices: hold position and get boxed against the barrier, or brake. He braked. The truck dropped back hard, fishtailed slightly on the wet pavement, and then took the next exit ramp at speed tires, screaming. I pulled onto the right shoulder and sat there for a moment with both hands still on the wheel and my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my back teeth. Elias pulled up behind me 60 seconds later. He was out of his car and at my window before I had finished processing that the shaking in my arms was adrenaline and not the road surface. He looked at the crumpled quarter panel, then at my face with an expression that moved rapidly through relief and landed firmly on fury. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough. "Shoulder," I said. "I'm fine. Elias, you've been following me for 3 days without telling me." "Yes," he said without a trace of apology. "And if I hadn't been, you'd be in the barrier right now, so we can have the argument about informed consent some other time." He pulled out his phone and took several photographs of my car, then walked back to look at the skid marks on the road behind us. "I got a partial plate before he hit the exit ramp, last 4 digits. He read them to me. I called Lena. She picked up on the first ring. I gave her the partial plate, the make, model, and the exit the truck had taken. She said she would run it immediately. Elias came back to my window and crossed his arms on the roof of the car, looking down at me. His jaw was set and his eyes were hard. This escalated faster than I expected, he said. Whoever is running this operation knows you're getting close. A moving vehicle as a weapon means they're not trying to scare you anymore. They want you gone before you finish whatever you're building. I know, I said. Then you need to move faster. He looked at me steadily. How much more do you need? 2 more pieces, I said. Maybe 3. Elias nodded. He didn't tell me to be careful because we were both old enough to know that careful was not the same as safe, and never had been. 20 minutes later, Lena called back. The partial plate matches a vehicle registered to a company called Halcyon Transit Solutions Incorporated in Nevada, she said. Nevada incorporation is a common choice for shell companies because Nevada has minimal disclosure requirements. You don't have to list the names of company officers or shareholders in public filings, which makes ownership much harder to trace quickly. A pause. I ran Halcyon against the corporate registry chain I've been building. It connects to the same cluster of shell companies that feed into Vail Meridian Logistics. My shoulder was throbbing and the November rain was streaking down the windshield, and somewhere on the Eisenhower, a truck driver was putting distance between himself and a job that had not gone the way it was supposed to. Julian sent the truck, I said. That's the connection the evidence supports, Lena said carefully. I can't say it in court yet, but yes, that's what this looks like. Can you trace Halcyon to a specific individual? I'm working on it, she said. Marcus, what I can confirm right now is that the vehicle used in tonight's incident is linked to the same financial network as the structuring operation. That gives me enough to elevate this to a full federal investigation. The moment I do that, we have subpoena power, wiretap authority, the full toolkit. Not yet, I said. Marcus. 2 more weeks, Lena. My voice came out harder than I intended, but I did not walk it back. 2 more weeks and I will give you everything. But if you move now, Julian knows, and everything he's built disappears into lawyers' offices before you can touch it. She exhaled sharply. 2 weeks. That's my final number. 2 weeks, I agreed. I sat on the shoulder of the Eisenhower for another few minutes after she hung up, listening to the rain and the distant sound of traffic, and thought about a man who had calculated that his father's life was worth a hired truck and a wet road on a Tuesday night. The thing that surprised me was not the anger. It was the grief. Clean and cold and absolute, the way grief gets when it has finally finished pretending it might not have to be there. The morning after someone tried to kill me on the Eisenhower, I drove to a safe house on West Loop with a bruised shoulder and what felt like a decade's worth of exhaustion sitting behind my eyes. Lena was already there when I arrived, standing at the kitchen table with documents spread across every inch of surface space. She looked up when I walked in, and whatever she saw on my face made her set down the paper in her hand very carefully before she spoke. "Sit down, Marcus," she said. Not a suggestion. I sat. She pushed a cup of coffee toward me, then pulled up a chair across the table and folded her hands on top of a thick manila folder. Lena Cross had the focused stillness of someone who had delivered bad news before and understood that how you said it mattered as much as what you said. "I'm going to walk you through this in order," she said. "I need you to let me finish before you respond. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. She opened the folder. Marcus Jerome Vail, life insurance policy number IL-2847-VX, originally issued in March 2020 by Meridian Life Assurance of Illinois. Original coverage amount $500,000. Named beneficiary at time of issuance, Evelyn Ruth Vail, your wife. She turned the first page. In January 2025, a policy amendment was filed with Meridian Life requesting an increase in coverage to $2.3 million and a change in primary beneficiary. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "The new primary beneficiary," Lena said, her voice absolutely steady, "is Julian Marcus Vail, your son, listed as 100% beneficiary." I set the cup down. My hand was not entirely steady. "The amendment required your signature as the insured party," Lena continued. "The signature on the amendment document does not match the signature on your original 2020 policy application." She slid a side-by-side comparison across the table. "I had a forensic document examiner review both samples this morning. Her preliminary assessment is that the 2025 signature is a practiced forgery. Someone studied your signature and replicated it, but the pen pressure and the slight leftward drift in your capital M are inconsistent with your authentic samples." I looked at the 2 signatures on the page in front of me. My own name written by someone else's hand on a document designed to ensure that my death would make my son very wealthy. My chest felt like it was being compressed from both sides at once. "Who prepared the amendment?" I asked. My voice came out quieter than I intended. The document was notarized by a Victor Sloan, Lena said. Sloan is an attorney licensed in Illinois with an office in the Gold Coast. His bar record is clean on paper, but I ran him through our financial intelligence database, and he appears as a listed contact in 3 previous insurance fraud investigations, none of which resulted in charges because the complaining parties withdrew. She paused. Victor Sloan is the kind of lawyer who does things that cannot quite be proven until someone looks hard enough. He prepared the forgery, I said. That's the working theory, Lena said. If we can tie Sloan to Julian directly, the forgery charge becomes conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, a Class 1 felony in Illinois. Combined with the financial structuring and the vehicle assault from last night, we are building a case that has real weight. She turned to the next document in the folder. There's one more thing, she said, and her voice shifted in a way that made me brace without knowing why. We obtained a copy of a will amendment filed with a private estate attorney in October 2025, 3 weeks ago. The amendment restructures your asset distribution significantly. Under the amended will, your primary residence, your investment accounts, and the proceeds of the life insurance policy would transfer in full to Julian Vale upon your death, with Evelyn Vale receiving only a fixed monthly stipend. I heard the words. I understood them, but there was a delay between understanding them and feeling them the way there is when something hits hard enough to temporarily outpace the nervous system. That's not my will, I said. No, Lena said. It is not. The signature on the amendment has the same forensic characteristics as the insurance forgery, same examiner's assessment, same practiced replication, same inconsistencies. She closed the folder and looked at me directly. Marcus, someone, and the evidence points to Julian working through Victor Sloan, has been building a legal architecture designed to transfer your entire estate to himself upon your death. The insurance policy provides immediate liquidity. The will amendment captures the physical and financial assets. Taken together, they represent a comprehensive plan for inheritance by fraud. I looked at the folder sitting closed on the table between us. 43 years ago, I had held this man as a newborn in a hospital room in Chicago and felt something so large and complete that I had no language for it. I had thought in that moment that I would do anything to keep him safe and give him a life worth living. He had grown up and decided that life was worth more as a transaction. The timing, I said, and my voice came out rough at the edges. When did Julian file the insurance amendment? Lena looked at her notes. January 14th, 2025. And when did Rafael Cruz first approach Noah? Lena checked again. Based on the timeline Noah documented, late January 2025, approximately 2 weeks after the insurance amendment. The sequence locked into place with the terrible clarity of things that were always true but only became visible when you finally looked directly at them. Julian had filed the insurance paperwork first. Then he had sent Rafael to Noah. He had secured the financial architecture before he activated the weapon. He had been that careful, that methodical, that cold. My son had prepared for my funeral before he had finished planning the means. What do you need from me to move forward? I asked. Lena leaned forward. I need you to not confront Julian before we're ready. I need 2 more weeks to build the evidentiary record to the point where he cannot walk away from it. Can you give me that? I looked at her across the table. This young woman who had been doing her job with honesty and precision while the ground shifted under everything I thought I knew about my family. You have 2 weeks, I said. But Lena, when this ends, it ends completely. Every layer, every name, every dollar. Every layer, she confirmed. Every name, every dollar. I drove home with the folder locked in my glove compartment and my father's voice in my head, a memory so old I could not place its origin, saying, the hardest thing a man ever has to do is look clearly at something he loves. I had looked, and I could not look away. Evelyn was in the living room when I got home, sitting in the armchair by the window with a book open in her lap that she clearly had not been reading. She looked up the moment I walked through the door. Her eyes moved across my face the way they had moved across faces for 40 years of marriage, reading the things I did not say before I had a chance to decide whether to say them. She closed the book. Sit down, Marcus, she said. It was the second time that day someone had said those exact words to me, and both times I had obeyed without argument, which probably said something about the state I was in. I sat on the couch across from her. The living room was warm the way Evelyn always kept it lamplight instead of overhead. The faint smell of the chamomile she had been drinking, a room that had absorbed 35 years of family life and still somehow held the shape of all of it. Tell me, she said. So I told her. Not everything at once I had learned in 30 years of delivering difficult information to people who needed to act on it. That sequence mattered. I told her about the wooden box first, about Noah's letter and the recordings. I watched her face move through surprise and then something that was not quite surprise at all, more like recognition. Then I told her about the insurance policy, the forged signature, the $2.3 million, Julian's name as sole beneficiary. Evelyn's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle working in her cheek. Her hands folded in her lap, pressed together until her knuckles whitened. But she did not cry. She did not fall apart. She sat in that armchair with the kind of contained devastation that only comes from a person who has already been carrying something heavy for a long time and just had its full weight confirmed. "The will," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "There's a will too, isn't there?" "Yes," I said. She made a sound that was not quite a word, something short and sharp that came from somewhere deep in the chest. Then she pressed her fingers over her mouth for a moment, breathed through her nose, and lowered her hand. "I need to show you something," she said. She stood up and went to the kitchen. I heard a drawer open. She came back carrying a small plastic Ziploc bag and set it on the coffee table between us. Inside the bag were 6 capsules. They looked like the calcium supplements Julian had been bringing her for the past 8 months, the same brand, the same orange color. But 2 of the capsules had been carefully opened and resealed, the join faintly visible if you knew to look. "I started keeping them 3 months ago," Evelyn said. She sat back down and looked at the bag with an expression that broke something in me. Not grief exactly, but the look of a woman confronting the cost of being right about something she desperately wished she had been wrong about. Every time Bianca brought them over, Bianca is Julian's wife, she started coming by every Thursday with supplements and groceries, always so cheerful, always so attentive. I would feel worse by Friday. Heart palpitations, dizziness, the kind of fatigue that doesn't lift no matter how much you sleep. "Evelyn," I said, and her name in my mouth came out ragged. "I'm not a doctor," she said quickly, firmly cutting off whatever I was about to say. "I am not making a medical diagnosis. I kept those capsules because something felt wrong and I was not foolish enough to throw away the evidence." She looked at me steadily. "I need someone qualified to test them. Whatever is in those capsules, I want it documented properly so it cannot be dismissed." I reached across the coffee table and took both her hands in mine. They were cold. I held them tighter. "I'm sending them to Lena tonight," I said. "She can get them to an independent forensic toxicology lab. Full chain of custody documentation. Every person who handles the sample is recorded. The storage conditions are logged. The testing methodology is documented. That chain is what makes the results admissible in court." I paused. "Evelyn, how long have you been living with this alone?" Her eyes finally went bright at the edges. She blinked hard once, refusing to let the tears come. "Since July," she said. "I started noticing in July." 4 months. She had carried this for 4 months without telling me, testing theories quietly in her own kitchen, saving capsules in Ziploc bags, keeping her suspicions to herself because she did not have proof, and she was too careful to accuse her own son without it. I felt a love for this woman so fierce and so painful it was nearly indistinguishable from grief. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and something that might have been gentle exasperation. "Because you just retired," she said. "Because for the first time in 40 years you were home, you were sleeping, you were present, and I thought—" Her voice cracked, the first real crack, and she pressed through it. "I thought maybe I was wrong. I thought maybe I was an old woman being paranoid about her own son. And I didn't want to be the one who ruined the first quiet we'd had in decades." I brought her hands to my mouth and held them there for a moment. My eyes burned and I did not try to stop it. "You are the least paranoid person I have ever known," I said against her knuckles. "And you are not old. You are the sharpest person in any room you walk into. You were always the sharpest person in any room." She made a sound that was half a laugh and half something that hurt. "Then why did it take you this long to come home and stay?" It was not an accusation. It was just the truth asked quietly by someone who had earned the right to ask it. "I don't have a good answer for that," I said. "No," she said. "You don't." She squeezed my hands hard. "But you're here now. So we finish this. Together." "Together," I said. She looked at the bag of capsules on the table between us, and then back at me, and her voice dropped to something very quiet. "Marcus, whatever Julian has become, he is still our son. Whatever we do it, remembering that." I looked at my wife, this woman who had every right to be destroyed by this and was choosing instead to be steady, and nodded once slowly. I remember, I said. Outside, November pressed against the windows. Somewhere in this city, our son was moving pieces across a board he had been building for 18 months. And for the first time since the hop-go landed on a restaurant table, I did not feel alone in what was coming. Emma called at 8:10 on a Thursday morning, and the first thing she said told me everything about how the night had gone for her. Noah sent something last night, she said. Her voice was tight and slightly hoarse, the voice of someone who had been awake since 3 a.m, processing information that did not get easier the longer you looked at it. I need you to come to Pilsen, not the apartment. There's a bar on West 18th called Reyes Tap. It's closed until 4. I have a key. Come alone. I was in my car in 6 minutes. The bar on West 18th was dark inside and smelled like last weekend. Emma was at a corner table with 2 laptops open and a legal pad covered in notes so dense the margins had run out of room. She looked up when I walked in, and the expression on her face was the kind that forms when a person has been sitting alone with something terrible and is relieved to finally hand part of it to someone else. "Sit down," she said, pushing a chair out with her foot. I sat. She turned this nearest laptop to face me without preamble. "Noah sent this at 2:47 this morning through the encrypted channel we set up," she said. "Audio file first. Listen." She pressed play. The recording was from inside what sounded like a warehouse distant machinery, the echo of a large open space. A voice came through electronic and altered the pitch shifted to obscure the speaker's natural register. The altered voice said, clipped and controlled, "Clean it up before Friday. All of it. No loose ends at the loading dock." Emma reached over and stopped the playback. "Noah has heard that phrase before," she said. "Not the words exactly, but that specific pattern. The way the sentence drops at the end, the stress on the word all, the slight pause before no loose ends. He heard it for years growing up." She looked at me directly. "He thinks he knows whose voice that is underneath the alteration." My pulse had gone very steady in the particular way it went steady when the body understood something the mind was still catching up to. "Play it again," I said. She played it again, the third time I heard it. Not the pitch that was unrecognizable, but the rhythm. The particular way the last syllable of a sentence got clipped short, like a door being shut firmly rather than slammed. A verbal habit so ingrained it survived even electronic distortion. I had heard that pattern at dinner tables and birthday parties and graduation ceremonies for 43 years. My throat tightened until it hurt. "There's more," Emma said. She turned the second laptop toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet Noah had built, 2 columns side by side. Left column, Julian Vale's documented travel calendar from Vale Meridian corporate records, pulled from a shared scheduling system Noah had accessed while embedded in the network. Right column confirmed shipment dates from the distribution operation. 8 months of data, 31 entries. They matched on 29 of 31 dates. "He built this over 2 weeks, Emma said, her voice dropping, cross-referencing Julian's out-of-office calendar against the shipment logs. When Julian was listed as traveling for business, a shipment moved within 48 hours. When Julian was in the office, nothing moved." She pressed her palm flat on the table. "Noah says no coincidence explains 29 out of 31. He says the broker is Julian." The air in that dark bar felt very thin suddenly. I looked at those 2 columns, my son's name on the left, a drug trafficking operations shipment log on the right, and felt something tear open in my chest that I was not going to be able to close again before this was over. "How is Noah?" I asked. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Emma's expression softened at the edges, and for just a second she looked very young and very frightened underneath the composure. "He cried when he figured it out," she said quietly. "He called me at 2 a.m, and the first thing he said was, 'It's Julian.' And then he didn't say anything else for about a minute because he couldn't." Her eyes went bright and wet. "He loved Julian. They weren't close, but Noah always tried. He always thought maybe someday they'd find a way to be brothers." She blinked hard. "Julian was using him as a murder weapon, and Noah spent 30 years hoping they could just be family." Something moved through me that I did not have a name for grief and fury, and a sorrow so deep it had no bottom. "What is Noah going to do?" I asked. Emma straightened. The softness was gone, replaced by a steadiness that reminded me suddenly and powerfully of Evelyn at 30. "He's already done it," she said. She slid a USB drive across the table. Everything on this drive came from inside Julian's operation. Internal communications shipment manifests financial records chain of command. Noah pulled it last night before he sent the audio file. She met my gaze without flinching. He said to tell you he's not on Julian's side. He was never on Julian's side. He just needed you to trust him long enough to get you the proof. Where is he right now? I asked. Julian's office, Emma said. Julian still believes Noah is on his side, that Raphael's story worked. Noah has been playing cooperative, showing up to meetings, answering emails, giving Julian exactly what a manipulated man would give. Julian has no idea Noah has been feeding everything outward for 3 months. I picked up the USB drive. It was warm from sitting in her hand. Tell Noah, I said, and my voice came out low and deliberate, to hold his position. Stay embedded. Stay visible. Don't let Julian see anything has changed. We are 6 days out. Tell him I said we're almost ready. Emma nodded. Then quietly, he asked me to tell you one more thing. What? Her voice went very soft. He said, tell Dad I'm sorry it took me this long to trust him, and tell him I know now he was always the right person to call Dad. The USB drive was very still in my closed fist. I stood up and my legs held, which I was grateful for because the alternative would have been embarrassing for both of us. Keep him safe, I said. I will, Emma said. I promise. The next morning, Saturday, 1 week before the party, I spread everything across the table in the West Loop safe house and looked at what we had built. 7 weeks of work. 3 separate lines of investigation converging on one name. Elias arrived at 9. Lena was already there. The 3 of us stood around that table the way investigators stand around evidence, not with satisfaction, because this was not the kind of case that produced satisfaction, but with the particular focus of people who understand that the window for action is finite and getting smaller. Lena spoke first. The toxicology results came back on Evelyn's capsules this morning, she said, and her voice carried the careful weight of someone delivering a verdict. The lab confirmed the presence of digoxin at approximately 3 times the therapeutic dose. Digoxin is a cardiac medication. At prescribed levels it regulates heart rhythm, but at elevated doses it causes exactly the symptoms Evelyn described. Fatigue, palpitations, dizziness. She paused. Chronic low-grade digoxin toxicity is difficult to detect without a specific blood test because the symptoms mimic ordinary aging. It would not have killed her quickly. It would have weakened her progressively, made her appear confused and frail, and eventually made her dependent on whoever was managing her care. The digoxin was pharmaceutical grade, Lena continued, not something you pull off a shelf. We're running the supply chain through DEA prescription records. Whoever sourced this had access to a licensed medical supplier or a compromised prescriber. We'll have a name within a week. Elias's jaw went tight. So Julian was going to make her incompetent enough to sign whatever he put in front of her. That is the most likely intent, yes, Lena said. I had known it was coming. I had known since the moment Evelyn set that Ziploc bag on the coffee table, but hearing it stated plainly in a federal agent's careful clinical language made the full shape of it visible in a way that hit me somewhere behind the sternum like a closed fist. Add it to the file, I said. My voice was very even. I had learned a long time ago that evenness in the voice was not the same as the absence of feeling. It was just discipline. What does the full evidentiary picture look like right now? Lena pulled up her laptop and turned it to face Elias and me. Financial structuring. $430,000 moved through shell companies connected to Vail Meridian over 8 months. Federal offense under the Bank Secrecy Act. She clicked to the next item. Insurance fraud, forged signature on a $2.3 million policy amendment confirmed by forensic document examination. Class 1 felony. Click. Will fraud, forged signature on an estate amendment, same examiner's assessment. Class 1 felony. Click. Conspiracy to commit aggravated battery. The Halcyon transit vehicle used in the Eisenhower incident connects through 3 shell company layers to Vail Meridian. Circumstantial but strong. Click. Digoxin administration, criminal poisoning under Illinois law 720 ILCS 5/12-4.5, a class 2 felony when the substance causes bodily harm. She looked up. And the USB Noah provided contains internal communications establishing Julian as the operational decision-maker for the distribution network that is the RICO predicate. Elias let out a slow breath through his nose. That's a serious pile. It's enough, Lena said. If we move on it through proper channels, Julian faces federal charges on the financial crimes, state charges on the poisoning and fraud counts, and RICO exposure on the distribution network. Victor Sloan and Malcolm Drake are named as co-conspirators in the fraud and protection schemes, respectively. She folded her hands. The question is how and when we move. The party, I said. Both of them looked at me. Julian has spent 18 months building this, I said. He planned the party. He booked the venue, invited the guests, designed the stage. He intends to use that room to do something, expose Noah, publicly trigger the will and insurance in some way or both. I looked at Lena. If we arrest him before the party, he disappears into lawyers before half of this evidence can be properly processed. But if we let him walk into that room believing he has already won, he won't be thinking about escape, Elias said, following the logic. He'll be thinking about the performance. And the performance requires him to be present and cooperative right up until the moment he isn't, I said. Lena looked at both of us for a long moment. Then she said, I want federal agents positioned outside the venue before the first guest arrives. Plain clothes, full radio communication. The moment you give me a signal, we move. No delay. Agreed, I said. I also want Noah formally documented as a cooperating witness before that night, Lena said. I need him protected legally and physically. If anything goes wrong in that room, his testimony needs to be clean and his safety needs to be guaranteed. Set it up, I said. Whatever paperwork he needs to sign, get it to Emma and she'll get it to him. Elias leaned forward on the table, his hands flat on the surface. Marcus, you understand that when this plays out in that ballroom in front of 80 people, including former colleagues and family, it is going to be the worst night of your life, even if everything goes exactly right. I looked at my old friend. This man who had stood at my side through 30 years of work that had asked more than it gave and felt a gratitude so deep it had nowhere to go. I know, I said. You're ready for that? I thought about Evelyn's hands around a cup of tea. I thought about Noah's voice on an audio file at 2:47 in the morning saying it was Julian. I thought about a shoebox full of letters that had never reached the boy they were written for. I have been ready, I said, since the moment I opened a wooden box on my desk and found out my son was asking me to save him. That evening, after Lena and Elias had gone, I sat alone in the safe house and dialed Noah's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail the way it always did. Now it was not safe for him to answer unknown numbers. I waited for the tone. It's Dad, I said. I just want you to know I trust you. I have always trusted you. I just needed you to know that before Saturday. I stopped. We finished this together, all of us. I ended the call and sat with the silence of that room for a while. 6 days. 7 weeks after a stranger in a gray coat set a wooden box on my lunch table, I walked into my own birthday party wearing a tuxedo and carrying enough grief to fill the room twice over. The Langham Chicago on a Saturday evening in late November was the kind of place that made everything look like it was worth celebrating. 3rd floor ballroom crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths pressed flat as paper, 80 guests in formal wear, the low murmur of conversation, a string quartet near the far wall playing something elegant and undemanding. Julian had done exactly what he had promised, a party worth the occasion. I kept my face exactly right as Evelyn and I walked in, warm, grateful, slightly overwhelmed by the fuss the way a man of 70 is supposed to be when his family goes to this kind of trouble for him. Evelyn's hand was in the crook of my arm. Her grip was firm enough to leave a mark. You look beautiful, I said quietly. You look like a man who hasn't slept in a week, she said back just as quietly with a small smile that did not reach her eyes. Which you aren't because you promised me you slept. I slept, I said. Liar, she said, still smiling, and steered us toward the first cluster of guests. Julian found us within 3 minutes. He was in a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who have always expected expensive things. And he was smiling, the full smile, the one that used the corners of his eyes, the one that had always, until 7 weeks ago, made me feel like the luckiest father in the room. He took my hand in both of his and shook it with a warmth that felt entirely real, because it had always felt entirely real, and that was the thing I had stopped being able to explain to myself. Dad. His voice was full of something that sounded like love. You look incredible. You went too far with this Julian, I said. Impossible. He released my hand and turned to kiss Evelyn on the cheek. Mom, you're stunning. Bianca is near the bar. She's been asking for you. He turned back to me and his eyes moved across my face with a brief searching quality that lasted less than a second. Come on. There are people who came a long way to see you. Bianca was where Julian said she was, at the bar near the far wall in a wine-colored dress, her smile wide and practiced and perfectly calibrated for an evening when everything was supposed to go according to plan. She embraced Evelyn with the warmth of a devoted daughter-in-law, and I watched Evelyn receive it with the equanimity of a woman who had been poisoned by those same careful hands and had chosen to say nothing yet. The next hour was the longest of my life. I shook hands with former colleagues. I thanked people for coming. I accepted a glass of champagne and held it without drinking because I needed every nerve I had for what was coming. Lena's people were outside. I had confirmed their positions before I left the house. 3 plainclothes agents at the main entrance, 2 at the service entrance, 1 in the lobby. Elias was in a car on the street. The technician controlling the ballroom's presentation system had been quietly replaced by one of Lena's people at 4 that afternoon. Everything was in place. The only variable was timing. At 8:45, Julian moved to the front of the room and picked up a wireless microphone. The string quartet faded. 80 guests turned toward him. If I could have everyone's attention, Julian said, and his voice carried the confident ease of a man who had been rehearsing this moment. I want to say a few words about my father before we get to the cake. Warm laughter from the crowd. Marcus Vale spent 30 years putting himself between this city and the people who wanted to hurt it. He missed birthdays, holidays, ordinary Tuesday evenings, all of it because the work came first. He paused for effect. He taught me that a man's worth is measured not by what he accumulates, but by what he protects. The irony of those words in that mouth on that night was so complete and so brutal that I had to look down at my shoes for exactly 2 seconds to keep my face from showing it. Julian's gaze moved to the back of the room where the presentation screen hung dark and waiting. His right hand shifted almost imperceptibly toward his jacket pocket, toward the remote signal he had arranged with what he believed was his technician. That was when I stood up. The movement was quiet. I simply rose from my chair, straightened my jacket, and picked up my champagne glass. A few people near me noticed first, then the ripple of attention moved outward, and within 4 seconds the room was focused on me instead of Julian. Julian's hand stopped moving. His smile held, but I had been reading faces for 40 years, and I saw the first hairline fracture appear at the edges of his eyes. I'd like to say something, I said. My voice carried easily in the silence. I raised my glass and looked out at every face in that room, old colleagues, family, people Julian had invited to witness what he believed was going to be a very different kind of evening. In 30 years of undercover work, I said slowly, I sat across from some of the most convincing performers I have ever encountered. Men who could lie to your face and make you feel grateful for it. I let that settle for a moment. But I have to say the most convincing performance I have ever witnessed in my life was not in a warehouse or a back room or a federal courtroom. Julian's smile was gone now. Not broken, just gone, pulled under by something he was fighting very hard not to let reach his face. It was right here, I said. At this table for the last 43 years. The ballroom held its breath. 80 people, crystal glasses, a string quartet that had stopped playing, all of it suspended in the particular silence that forms when a room full of people realizes simultaneously that what they came to watch is not what they are going to see. Julian took 1 step forward. His voice came out carefully controlled the way it always did when he was deciding how to reframe a situation. "Dad," he said. I think the champagne might be talking. Soft, uncertain laughter from a few guests near the front, an invitation for me to smile and sit back down and let the evening continue the way he had planned it. I did not smile. I did not sit down. "Julian," I said, and my voice was very quiet. "I want to show our guests something." I looked toward the back of the room. The screen behind the string quartet, the same screen Julian had intended to use, flickered once and came to life. Not with Julian's prepared presentation, with mine. The first document that appeared was the insurance policy amendment, large enough to read from 10 feet away. Julian Marcus Vale, primary beneficiary, $2.3 million. A signature that a forensic document examiner had confirmed in a written report, now also on that screen, was not mine. A sound moved through the room, not quite a gasp, not quite silence, something in between. Julian's face went through 5 expressions in less than 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, calculation, fury, and then the particular blankness of a man who understands that the ground has moved and he has not yet determined how far he has fallen. "That's fabricated," Julian said loud enough for the room to hear. His voice had lost the warmth entirely. "Someone put this together to embarrass our family. Dad, whoever gave you this, the second document," I said. The screen changed. The will amendment. Same forensic assessment. Same confirmed forgery. The Evanston address receiving direct transfers from shell companies connected to Vail Meridian Logistics. A photograph of Malcolm Drake exchanging an envelope with Adrian Knox in a parking structure. Julian turned to face me fully. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle working in his cheek. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said. "You are standing in front of 80 people destroying your own family on the word of the third document," I said. The internal communications Noah had pulled from Julian's network appeared on the screen. Emails, text threads, operational directives. The broker's alias appeared in a dozen exchanges. Beside it, the audio waveform comparison, the broker's voice pattern against a recording of Julian at a company event. The rhythm analysis Lena's forensic audio team had run overnight. 83% match on vocal cadence markers, 91% match on sentence terminal stress patterns. Someone at a table near the back made a sound like they had been struck. Julian took 2 steps toward me, and his voice dropped to something that was trying very hard to stay in control and failing at the edges. "You would do this," he said. "You would actually stand here and do this." "Yes," I said. "In front of all these people, on your birthday, you would burn this family to the ground." "I didn't start the fire, Julian." The side door to the left of the stage opened. Noah walked in. He was in a dark jacket, no tie, and he moved with the careful steadiness of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his head many times and was determined not to let his legs shake. He carried a laptop and set it on the nearest table without looking at Julian. Then he looked at Julian. 4 months, Noah said. His voice was level, but his hands, I noticed, were pressed flat against his thighs, the same way mine had been in a parking structure, holding still so they would not shake. "I spent 4 months inside your operation. Every file on that screen I watched being created. Every transaction, every shell company, every order you gave through a voice modulator that you thought was unrecognizable." He paused. "I recognized it the first time I heard it. I've been listening to your voice my whole life." Julian turned on Noah with a fury that had been building for 30 years and finally had nowhere left to go. "You have no right to stand in this room," Julian said, his voice shaking with it. "You are the son of a criminal. You were brought into this family out of guilt, not love, and you spent your whole life taking up space that didn't belong to you." "He's my son." My voice came out with a force that surprised even me. "Not because of blood, because he chose to stand in that room and tell the truth when everything in his life gave him a reason not to." I looked at Julian, this man I had held as a newborn, this man I had missed for 3 years and spent the next 40 trying to reach, and felt the full weight of everything that had gone wrong between us settle onto my shoulders at once. "Can you say the same thing tonight?" Julian's breath was coming fast and shallow. His hands had curled into fists at his sides. The composure he had worn for 43 years was gone, and what was underneath it was rawer and more broken than I had been prepared for. "You saved him," Julian said, and his voice cracked on the word. "You saved the son of the man you were sent to destroy. You brought him into our home, and you gave him everything." His voice broke further. "And I was already there. I was already there, and you still left." The room had gone completely still. The grief in Julian's voice was real. I had known it would be. I had known since the night Elias slid that phone number across a coffee shop table that the crime and the pain were not separate things. They had grown from the same root 30 years deep. But grief, I had learned, did not excuse what it produced. The doors at the back of the room opened. Lena Cross walked in with 2 federal agents in plain clothes. She met my eyes across the room and gave a single nod. As the agents moved toward Julian, I saw Bianca take 1 step back, her hand pressed flat against her chest, her face white as the tablecloth beside her. Lena stepped toward her as well. "Mrs. Vail," Lena said quietly, "we'll need to speak with you tonight." Bianca's eyes went wide and glassy. "I didn't know what was in them," she said, her voice barely a breath. "He told me they were vitamins. He said your mother needed the extra supplements. Whether that was true or not, I did not yet know. but the way her hands shook told me she had not slept well in months. "Julian Vale," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of that ballroom, "you are under arrest." The hotel corridor outside the grand ballroom at the Langham felt like a different world from the one I had just left, quieter, colder. The polished marble floors reflecting the overhead lights in long, golden streaks. My shoulders still throbbed from the truck attack 2 weeks ago, and every step sent a dull pulse up my neck. But I kept walking, because Noah was somewhere in that building and I needed to find him before the night swallowed him whole. Lena Cross fell into step beside me, her bureau credentials already back inside her jacket. She had coordinated the arrest with a precision I hadn't seen since my own bureau days. 4 agents in plain clothes. 1 coordinated signal from my phone. Julian Vale in handcuffs inside 7 minutes. Rafael Cruz was picked up at the loading dock on Wacker, she said, her voice low and clipped. He was trying to reach a black SUV registered to Halcyon Transit Solutions. Same shell, same plate series from the Eisenhower incident. Victor Sloan was picked up at his Gold Coast office at 9 this evening, she added. His attorney advised him to cooperate. He's talking. My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. He talk yet? Not a word. Lena kept her eyes forward. But his attorney called within 4 minutes of the arrest. Someone had that number ready and waiting. Someone meaning Julian. Someone meaning Julian had a contingency plan. She finally glanced at me. "Marcus, your son built this like an architect. Every exit accounted for, except you." I didn't respond to that. I couldn't, because the part of me that had watched Julian take his first steps, that had sat in the back row of his college graduation with Evelyn's hand in mine, that part was bleeding out quietly somewhere behind my sternum. We turned a corner toward the service corridor, and I saw him. Noah stood near the emergency exit, one shoulder against the wall, arms crossed tight over his chest. Emma Hart was beside him, her hand on his forearm, her knuckles pale. When he saw me, he pushed off the wall immediately, and something in his expression cracked open. Not relief exactly. More like a man who had been holding his breath for 3 months, finally exhaling. "It's done," he asked, his voice rough at the edges. "It's done," I said. He let out a breath that shook through his entire frame, and his eyes went glassy. He pressed the back of his wrist against his mouth and looked at the ceiling the way men do when they're trying not to cry in a public corridor. I kept thinking. His voice broke. He tried again. I kept thinking if I was wrong, if I had read it wrong, if that phrase meant something else and Julian was just that, I'd destroyed everything for nothing. "You weren't wrong." I stepped closer. 29 of 31 shipment matches, Noah. The insurance forgery. The capsules your stepmother kept for 4 months. You weren't wrong about a single thing. Emma made a small, choked sound beside him, pressing her fingers to her lips. "He was going to let them blame Noah," she said, her voice shaking. "The whole network, when it eventually collapsed, the paper trail pointed back to Noah's freight access codes. Julian had been building a frame for 2 years. The cold settled through my chest like concrete. "I know," I said. "Lena found the secondary file structure on the USB last week." Noah looked at me sharply. "You knew, and you didn't." "I needed you inside until tonight," I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended. "If you had pulled out early, Julian would have had 72 hours to move assets and activate the frame. Everything you built would have collapsed." His jaw worked. His eyes were wet and furious and exhausted all at once. "You used me," he said, not as an accusation, just as a statement of fact he was testing in his own mouth. "I protected you the only way I knew how." My throat tightened. "Same thing I've done since 1995. That landed. I watched it land, watched his expression shift from anger to something older and more complicated. His chin dropped. He nodded once, slow, and the anger didn't vanish, but it made room for something else. I turned when I heard footsteps behind me. Detective Malcolm Drake was being escorted by 2 federal officers down the adjacent corridor, his wrists cuffed in front of him. He was in his party clothes, charcoal suit, silver tie, which made it worse somehow. He looked wrong without a badge, the way a word looks wrong when you've stared at it too long. He saw me. "Marcus." His voice was tight controlled, but his eyes were glassy. I stopped walking. 24 years, I said. My voice was steady. I made sure of that. "I trained you for 2 years. I testified at your promotion hearing. I told every senior officer you were the most instinctively honest detective I had ever supervised." His throat worked hard. His shoulders dropped. "He came to me with money when my daughter was sick," Malcolm said. "The hospital bills were—" He exhaled sharply through his nose. "I told myself it was one time, cover one shipment route. Let one report go unfiled. And then it was 2 times, I said. And then it was a standing arrangement. He looked at the floor. I'm sorry, Marcus. The words hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. My eyes burned not with forgiveness, not with anything clean, just the raw, exhausted grief of a man who had spent 30 years building trust and was now standing in a hotel corridor watching it come apart in pieces. Get him out of here, I said to the federal officers. I didn't watch them leave. I turned back to Noah and Emma instead, and I felt Evelyn's hand find my arm from behind. She had come through the side corridor, her evening dress still impeccable, but her eyes red-rimmed and fierce. Is it over? She asked. I covered her hand with mine. Almost, I said. One more thing left to do. 2 weeks later, the Lincoln Park house felt different. It was the same kitchen, the same amber light over the same round oak table, the same view of the backyard where the last of November's leaves had blown against the fence and stayed there too exhausted to move. But something had shifted in the house the way air shifts after a long illness finally breaks. Quieter, cleaner, still carrying the weight of what had passed through it but no longer suffocating under it. I was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me when I heard the knock. 3 knocks, then a pause, then one more. The old signal I had taught both boys when they were children so I would know it was family and not a stranger. My chest contracted. I opened the door. Noah stood on the front step in a gray wool coat, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders tight against the early December chill. Emma was with him 1 step behind, holding a covered dish with both hands. She gave me a small, careful smile, the kind that acknowledges that some moments are too large for greetings. You're early, I said. You always told me punctuality is respect, Noah said. His voice was even. Careful. But his eyes were doing something complicated, scanning my face the way he used to as a child looking for permission. Come in, I said. Evelyn's been cooking since 7 this morning. If you don't eat everything on that table, she will genuinely never forgive you. He almost smiled. Inside, Evelyn came from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. And when she saw Noah, she didn't say a word. She just crossed the room and put her arms around him, and he went rigid for 1 second before something gave way, and he wrapped his arms around her and pressed his face against the side of her head. His shoulders shook once, just once, but I saw it. You should have told us sooner, she said into his shoulder, her voice thick. We would have helped you. You didn't have to carry that alone. I didn't want to put you in danger, he said, his voice muffled. If Julian had known you knew, I know. She pulled back and held his face in both hands the way she used to when he was 8 years old and frightened of thunderstorms. I know, baby, but next time you call us, you always call us. His eyes were bright and wet, and he pressed his lips together hard to hold himself steady. Emma set the dish on the counter, and Evelyn immediately redirected her energy toward the food-pulling lids and asking about ingredients with the focused warmth of a woman who expresses love most fluently through feeding people. Within minutes, the kitchen was full of overlapping voices and the smell of something rich and warm. Noah found me in the back hallway near the window that looked out at the yard. I need to say something, he said. Then say it. He exhaled through his nose. His hands were in his pockets again, a habit he had when he was working up to something difficult. I spent a long time telling myself that the Vale name wasn't really mine, that I was Dante Moreno's son, and that made me something separate, something borrowed. He looked at the window. The bare yard, the stubborn leaves against the fence. After the accident, when the memories started coming back, the house in Pilsen, the gunshots, the man who picked me up off the floor, his voice cracked and he pressed forward through it. I kept seeing your face, but I didn't want to trust it, because I'd seen what Julian did with trust. My eyes burned. I kept my breathing even through sheer force of will. Noah, let me finish. He turned to look at me directly. His jaw was tight, his eyes red at the rims, but his gaze was steady. You went undercover for 3 years and you still wrote me letters you couldn't send. You brought me home when the system would have just filed me away. You fought a family court judge for 14 months to make the adoption legal. I found the court documents in your office last year. I know what it cost you. His voice broke on the last word. He pulled in a breath. I'm not borrowed. I'm not separate. I'm your son. I just needed to stop being afraid to say it. The burning behind my eyes became something I could no longer manage. I looked at the ceiling for 1 long second, the way you do when you're 70 years old and you've kept yourself composed through 30 years of violence and loss and betrayal, and then I gave up keeping myself composed and I pulled him into my arms. He gripped the back of my jacket with both hands like a man holding on to the only solid thing left standing. We stayed like that for a long time, long enough that the kitchen sounds faded to the background, long enough that the December light through the window shifted from white to gold. "I've got you," I said into his shoulder. My voice came out cracked and worn and completely honest. "I've always had you." He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled back, pressing the heel of his hand against his eyes. "Evelyn's going to cry if she sees us like this," he said. "Evelyn has been crying since Tuesday," I said. "She's fully committed at this point." He laughed, a real one, rough and sudden and desperately welcome. We walked back into the kitchen together. Emma looked up from the counter, read our faces, and her eyes went soft and bright. Evelyn glanced over from the stove, took one look at us, and turned back to her pot with a deep and satisfied nod, as if the universe had finally arranged itself into an order she found acceptable. I sat down at the table, I picked up my cold coffee, and for the first time in 30 years the house felt complete. They say God gives every man exactly the life he needs to learn what he cannot learn any other way. I spent 30 years believing the most dangerous thing I could face was a man with a weapon in a dark warehouse. I was wrong. The most dangerous thing I ever faced was sitting across from me at a white tablecloth restaurant, cutting into a piece of salmon, wearing my own eyes in his face. This is one of those family betrayal revenge stories that people share in hushed voices, the kind you read late at night on family Reddit stories. Threads and think, this cannot be real. I am here to tell you, it can be. I lived it. I was the father who chose the mission over the morning. I was the man who came home from saving strangers and forgot that the boy watching the front door every night needed saving most of all. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. Do not do what I did. Do not let absence become your legacy. Family betrayal. Revenge does not begin in warehouses or courtrooms. It begins in the quiet years, the missed birthdays, the unanswered questions, the doors that close a little more each time until one day they don't open at all. The family Reddit stories that break your heart always start the same way, with someone who had time and chose everything else instead. I had a second chance. Most people do not. Choose your table at home before any table in this world. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. I want to hear what you felt. Share it with someone who needs it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because the next story is already waiting and it hits just as hard. Thank you truly for staying with me until the very last word. One thing before we go, some of the stories ahead carry fictional elements built carefully for reflection and for the conversations worth having. If that's not your space, no judgment, find what fits you. But if you're staying, I promise every story here is worth your time.